The telegram that arrived at Whitehaven Mansions on that grey November morning bore the unmistakable urgency of a crisis that had already spiraled beyond conventional understanding. Hercule Poirot, seated at his breakfast table with characteristic precision, his coffee cup positioned exactly parallel to his morning correspondence, read the message twice before setting it down with the deliberate care of a man who recognizes the presence of an exceptional puzzle. Impossible murder. Stop victim found a locked study. Stop no footprints anywhere. Stop need your little grey cells. Immediately stop Inspector Japp. Within 2 hours, the Belgian detective found himself alighting from the morning train at Little Wickham Station, his immaculate appearance unmarred by travel, his green eyes already bright with the intellectual anticipation that invariably accompanied such intriguing summons. The motor car that collected him wound through countryside painted in the muted palette of late autumn, eventually delivering him to Ashford Grange, a Tudor manor house whose weathered stone facade suggested centuries of accumulated secrets. Inspector Japp met him at the entrance, his weathered features bearing the expression of a man confronted with circumstances that challenged every assumption of his considerable experience. "Thank heaven you've come, Poirot," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "This case has got me completely baffled. In 30 years of police work, I've never encountered anything quite like it." As they walked through corridors lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow their progress, Japp outlined the essential facts. Sir Reginald Ashford, a wealthy industrialist whose fortune derived from South African mining interests, had been discovered dead in his private study at 8 o'clock that morning. The room had been locked from the inside, the key still in place. The windows, too, had been secured from within, their heavy Victorian latches firmly engaged. "But here's what makes it truly impossible," Japp continued, his voice dropping as they approached the sealed study. "The housekeeper had the floors polished yesterday afternoon with a special wax. Something about preparing for weekend guests. The surface shows every mark, every footprint with perfect clarity. We can see Sir Reginald's own tracks from the door to his desk, where he apparently sat to write letters. But there are no other prints, Poirot. None approaching the desk, none circling the room, none near the windows. It's as if his killer materialized from thin air, struck, and vanished like smoke." Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest, his fingers unconsciously adjusting his tie to ensure perfect symmetry. "And the cause of death, mon ami?" "Poison, according to Dr. Morrison. He's the local physician. Appears to be cyanide, administered in Sir Reginald's evening brandy. The glass was still on his desk, about half empty. Quick acting, probably took effect within minutes." They paused outside the study door, through whose glass panels Poirot could observe the scene of this perplexing crime. The chamber reflected its owner's methodical nature. Law books arranged with mathematical precision, a massive mahogany desk positioned to command the room, and every object in its designated place, except for the crumpled form that had once been Sir Reginald Ashford. The household inspector, who was present yesterday evening. Japp consulted his notebook with practiced efficiency. Lady Margaret Ashford, Sir Reginald's second wife, married him 5 years ago after her first husband's death. Then there's Miss Diana Ashford, his daughter from his first marriage, 25 years old, unmarried. Dr. James Whitmore was dining with the family. He's engaged to Miss Diana, recently established his practice in the village, and of course, the servants. Pemberton, the butler, Mrs. Davies, the cook, and 2 housemaids. The family relationships, they were harmonious? A slight hesitation crossed Japp's features. That's where things become complicated. Sir Reginald wasn't exactly beloved. Made his fortune through ruthless business practices, and he applied the same methods to his personal relationships. Lady Margaret married him for security rather than affection. There was considerable tension between them. Miss Diana had been pressing him to increase her inheritance, wanted independence after her marriage, and Dr. Whitmore had recently approached him about financing a new medical clinic been turned down rather harshly. "Ah," Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming with interest. "The eternal motivations, money, freedom, and wounded pride. Most illuminating indeed." The Belgian detective approached the study door with the reverence of a scholar examining an ancient text. Through the glass, he observed the scene with methodical precision, noting the arrangement of furniture, the position of papers on the desk, and most particularly, the brandy glass that had allegedly delivered Sir Reginald to his final rest. The polished floor gleamed under the electric lights, its surface unmarked save for the single trail of footprints leading from door to desk. A path that told a story of a man who had walked to his death alone, yet had somehow been murdered by an invisible hand. "Inspector," Poirot said finally, straightening his shoulders with the satisfaction of a man who recognizes a worthy intellectual challenge, "I believe it is time to meet this most interesting family. For while the physical circumstances of this crime may appear impossible, the human elements, those will reveal everything we need to know. The room may show us no footprints, but the hearts and minds of our suspects, they will leave traces that no amount of polished wax can conceal." As they turned toward the drawing room where the household waited, Poirot's mind was already beginning to arrange the pieces of this fascinating puzzle, confident that somewhere within the tangle of human motives and impossible circumstances lay a solution that would satisfy both logic and justice. The drawing-room at Ashford Grange possessed the subdued elegance of a household in crisis, its cream-colored walls and pastoral landscapes providing an incongruous backdrop to the tension that permeated the air. As Poirot entered with Inspector Japp, he immediately catalogued the assembled group with the precision of a naturalist observing specimens under stress. Lady Margaret Ashford occupied the central position on a Chesterfield sofa, her posture rigidly correct despite the circumstances. She was a handsome woman in her early 40s, with auburn hair arranged in fashionable waves and intelligent hazel eyes that betrayed neither excessive grief nor relief. Her black mourning dress, Poirot noted, appeared hastily donned, the buttons slightly misaligned, suggesting either genuine shock or carefully calculated performance. The pearls at her throat lay with the exactness of habit rather than ease. Beside the fireplace stood Miss Diana Ashford, her resemblance to her deceased father evident in the determined set of her jaw and the calculating intelligence behind her dark eyes. 25 years of age, she possessed striking beauty, yet there was something brittle about her composure, like fine china under stress. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she gripped the mantelpiece, and Poirot observed the palpable tension between her and her stepmother, a silent communication of mutual discomfort. Dr. James Whitmore paced near the tall windows, his medical training evident in his careful observation of everyone present. A man in his early 30s with prematurely grey temples, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of one accustomed to life and death decisions. His engagement to Diana was announced by the modest diamond ring that caught the morning light, yet his attention seemed divided between his fiancée and the broader implications of the tragedy. Standing respectfully near the door, Pemberton the butler maintained the perfect balance of availability and invisibility that marked the truly accomplished servant. His weathered features revealed nothing, though Poirot detected the slight tension around his eyes that suggested intimate knowledge of household dynamics. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his accent lending formal courtesy to the proceedings, "I am Hercule Poirot. I must express my condolences while requesting your complete cooperation in uncovering the truth." Lady Margaret spoke first, her voice controlled yet carrying undertones of strain. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, we are all anxious to resolve this terrible mystery." "Indeed, madam. Perhaps you could describe yesterday evening. The dinner, the conversation, the general atmosphere." "We dined at 7, Lady Margaret replied, her fingers worrying at her wedding ring. "The conversation was strained. Reginald had been in one of his difficult moods, particularly sharp with everyone. Diana stepped forward, her composure cracking slightly. He was impossible, Monsieur Poirot. James had presented a perfectly reasonable proposal for a medical clinic, and father dismissed it with such contempt that I was ashamed. Dr. Whitmore placed a gentle hand on her arm. Diana, please. Your father had every right to decline. The amount involved was substantial. Ah, Poirot interjected softly. And what was the nature of this proposal, Doctor? I wished to establish a modern clinic in the village. I had prepared detailed financial projections, but Sir Reginald was uninterested in what he termed charitable ventures. The atmosphere must have been most uncomfortable, Poirot observed. And after dinner, Pemberton cleared his throat respectfully. Sir Reginald retired to his study at 9 o'clock, as was his custom. He requested his evening brandy at 9:30. I delivered both personally. You observed his demeanour? He appeared agitated, sir. He was writing letters with considerable vigour. I could hear his pen scratching forcefully. And the brandy service? You prepared this as always? Yes, sir. Sir Reginald was particular about his brandy. Courvoisier, warmed slightly. I set the decanter and clean glass on the silver tray, carried it along, and he took it at the door. Poirot moved toward the hall where the tray remained on the refectory table. The silver service bore the Ashford monogram, the decanter half full, a single balloon glass with amber residue at the bottom. He bent, but did not touch, noting the damp ring beneath the decanter and a faint asymmetrical moisture mark on the glass rim. Lady Margaret, you retired at what time? Shortly after 10. I had developed a headache and took a powder. Miss Ashford? I remained in the music room until nearly 11 playing piano. James stayed with me for half an hour, then walked back to the village. Dr. Whitmore nodded confirmation. I left at approximately 10:30. The walk takes 20 minutes through the woods. Poirot's methodical mind arranged these facts into patterns, noting the gaps in time and opportunities they represented. And Sir Reginald's study remained undisturbed throughout the night. Completely, sir, Pemberton answered. The key was in the lock on the inside, windows latched from within. The polished floor shows every mark, only Sir Reginald's footprints from door to desk. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his green eyes moving from face to face. Each person possessed motive, opportunity, and intelligence to commit murder, yet the physical circumstances suggested an impossibility that challenged conventional explanation. Merci, he said finally. Now, if you will permit, I should like to examine each of you individually. For while human nature provides motive for murder, it is often the smallest details that reveal the method. As he prepared to conduct private interviews, Poirot was acutely aware that behind their masks of grief and shock, each member of this household concealed secrets that might prove crucial to solving the mystery of the room without footprints. Poirot established himself in the morning room, its pale winter light providing the perfect setting for the delicate art of psychological excavation. He arranged his notebook with characteristic precision, positioning his fountain pen at the exact angle that satisfied his sense of order, while Inspector Japp settled into a corner chair to observe the master at work. Lady Margaret, if you would be so kind, Poirot requested, his voice carrying the formal courtesy that masked his penetrating intelligence. Lady Margaret entered with measured grace, seating herself opposite the detective with practiced composure. Yet Poirot's keen eyes immediately detected the slight tremor in her fingers and the way her gaze avoided direct contact, preferring to focus on the rose garden beyond the windows. Madame, you have been married to Sir Reginald for 5 years. Perhaps you could describe the nature of your relationship. A shadow crossed her carefully controlled features. Reginald was not an easy man to live with, Monsieur Poirot. He possessed great intelligence and business acumen, but he lacked warmth. Our marriage was one of mutual convenience rather than affection. And your financial circumstances before this marriage? Lady Margaret's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. My first husband left debts rather than assets. Reginald offered security, and I accepted his proposal. Recently, however, he had threatened to alter his will, claiming I was too extravagant. Her voice carried bitter resignation. He enjoyed having power over people. Poirot observed how she worried at her wedding ring, noting the faint discoloration on her kid glove where it lay across the chair arm. "You retired with a headache at 10 o'clock?" "Yes. I took a bromide powder and went directly to my room. I heard nothing unusual until Pemberton's cry this morning." When Lady Margaret departed, Poirot summoned Miss Diana Ashford. The young woman entered with visible agitation, her earlier composure having deteriorated during the wait. She perched on the edge of her chair like a bird prepared for flight. "Miss Ashford, your relationship with your father was difficult." Diana's hands clenched in her lap, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "Father was impossible, Monsieur Poirot. He controlled every aspect of my life, my allowance, my social activities, even my engagement to James. When I asked him to settle a portion of my inheritance early, he refused, saying I needed to learn the value of dependence." Her eyes flashed with resentment. His rejection of James's clinic proposal was the final humiliation. He called it a fool's errand and James a fortune hunter. "You remained in the music room until 11 o'clock. "Yes, I was too upset to sleep. Playing piano helps calm my nerves. James stayed until 10:30, then walked back to his lodgings through the woods." Poirot's gaze drifted to her patent leather shoes, noting a tiny crescent of pale wax caught against the stitching, the telltale mark of contact with the freshly polished floors. "The corridors can be treacherous after polishing, mademoiselle." A flush colored her cheeks. "Pemberton warned everyone to be careful." Dr. Whitmore entered next, carrying himself with the controlled professionalism that marked his medical training. His responses were measured and thoughtful, yet Poirot detected underlying tension beneath his calm exterior. "Doctor, Sir Reginald's rejection of your clinic proposal represented a significant setback. Naturally, I was disappointed. However, I understood his position from a business perspective. I have other potential sources of support, though his backing would have provided immediate credibility." Poirot noted the precise way Whitmore kept his hands visible, particularly the narrow cut across his right forefinger, carefully dressed with adhesive. "You left at 10:30, walking through the woods?" "Yes, the path is familiar. I've taken it countless times. The walk requires about 20 minutes at a steady pace. I encountered no one during the journey." "Your profession provides access to many chemical substances, Doctor?" Whitmore's composure remained steady. "Not cyanide, if that's your implication. It's not an antiseptic we employ in general practice. I recognized the smell this morning only because I encountered it once during a hospital training years ago." Finally, Poirot briefly questioned Pemberton, whose responses carried the weight of intimate household knowledge carefully constrained by professional discretion. "The brandy service. You prepared this exactly as always?" "Yes, sir. Sir Reginald was particular about the temperature and glass. I warmed the brandy slightly and used his preferred balloon glass. When I delivered it at 9:30, he appeared agitated, writing with unusual force. I could hear the pen scratching from the hallway." "The study door was locked from within when you discovered the body?" "Yes, sir. The key was in the interior lock, as always. Sir Reginald insisted on privacy when working late." As the interviews concluded, Poirot found himself with a collection of motives, opportunities, and carefully guarded secrets. Each suspect possessed compelling reasons for wanting Sir Reginald dead, yet the central mystery remained. How had someone managed to poison him in a locked room, leaving no trace of their presence on the polished floor? The answer, Poirot knew, lay not merely in the physical evidence, but in understanding the psychology of a household where resentment and desperation had finally found expression in murder. The human heart, he reflected, was far more revealing than any locked room, if one knew how to read its secrets. With the interviews concluded, Poirot requested permission to examine the locked study where Sir Reginald had met his mysterious end. Inspector Japp produced the key that had been carefully extracted from the interior lock, and together they crossed the threshold into the chamber that held the secret of this impossible crime. The study embodied its owner's obsessive need for control. Floor-to-ceiling bookcases lined 3 walls, their leather-bound volumes arranged with mathematical precision by subject and height. The massive mahogany desk commanded the center of the room, positioned to oversee both the entrance and the tall windows overlooking the estate grounds. Every object occupied its designated place with ritualistic order, save for the chalk outline where Sir Reginald's body had been discovered. Poirot moved with the reverence of a scholar examining a priceless manuscript, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail with methodical precision. The polished floor gleamed under the electric lights, its waxed surface bearing the evidence that had so thoroughly baffled the local constabulary. A single, unbroken trail of footprints leading directly from the door to the desk chair, terminating precisely where death had claimed its victim. "Observe, mon ami," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the path without disturbing its clarity. Size 10, evening shoes. The right heel bearing slightly more weight. Sir Reginald favored that foot. The stride is regular, purposeful, suggesting no distress or awareness of danger. Rising with characteristic grace, the Belgian detective approached the desk where the remnants of Sir Reginald's final evening remained undisturbed. 3 completed letters lay in a neat stack, the fountain pen positioned with geometric precision parallel to the leather blotter. Beside them sat the brandy glass that had delivered death, its crystal surface bearing the amber residue of the fatal drink. Poirot lifted one of the completed letters with infinite care, noting the firm handwriting that showed no tremor of fear or illness. To his solicitor, requesting a meeting to discuss testamentary changes, he observed. "And here," he indicated a half-finished sheet of expensive writing paper. "A letter to Lady Margaret, begun but never completed. Recent events have compelled me to reconsider certain arrangements." Most illuminating. The detective's attention shifted to the brandy service, examining the crystal decanter and balloon glass with microscopic intensity. The rim of the glass bore the faint trace of lips that would speak no more, while the decanter sat centered on its silver tray with the precision of a man who valued order above all else. Together, they verified the windows. Each of the 3 tall casements was indeed locked from within, their heavy Victorian latches showing no signs of recent manipulation. The fireplace chimney proved equally impenetrable, its narrow dimensions and closed damper, eliminating any possibility of access from above. As they completed their examination, Inspector Japp's frustration finally erupted. "It's impossible, Poirot. A man poisoned in a locked room with no means of entry or exit. I've been over it 100 times, and I can only conclude one thing. Sir Reginald must have taken his own life." "Suicide?" Poirot's eyebrows rose with polite interest. "Think about it," Japp continued, warming to his theory. "He was agitated, as Pemberton testified. Perhaps he had some hidden mechanism, a spring-loaded device that dropped cyanide into his glass after he'd settled at his desk. He locks the door, activates the mechanism, drinks, and meets his end. It's the only explanation that fits the physical evidence." Poirot listened with characteristic patience, his head tilted thoughtfully. "An ingenious hypothesis, Inspector, and one that certainly addresses the constraints of our locked room. But consider the psychology of the man." The detective moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds with contemplative intensity. Sir Reginald Ashford was, by all accounts, a man of absolute control. Ruthless, perhaps, but always commanding. He wielded power like a conductor's baton, orchestrating every aspect of his domain. Such a man, contemplating his final act, would surely leave a decisive statement, a letter, a confession, some ultimate expression of his will. "But there was no suicide note," Japp protested. "Precisely," Poirot replied, turning back with a slight smile. "And consider the method. A man so particular about his evening brandy, warmed to exact temperature, served in his preferred glass. Would he risk a crude mechanical device that might spoil his final pleasure? Would he choose cyanide, with its unmistakable bitter almond scent, when more elegant methods were available? Jap's confidence wavered. Then what are you suggesting? I am suggesting, mon ami, that we are dealing with a most ingenious human mind, rather than supernatural intervention. The absence of footprints is indeed significant, but perhaps not in the way we initially assumed. Poirot adjusted his tie with characteristic precision. The solution lies not in mechanical impossibilities, but in the very human capacity for misdirection. Someone in this household has committed murder most clever, creating the perfect illusion of impossibility. As they prepared to leave the study, Poirot paused at the threshold, his penetrating gaze sweeping the chamber one final time. Somewhere within these walls lay the key to understanding how a killer had struck without leaving a trace, a puzzle that would require all the resources of his little gray cells to unravel. Following his examination of the locked study, Poirot requested to trace the precise path of the fatal brandy service from its preparation to Sir Reginald's final consumption. Inspector Japp, though skeptical of such methodical attention to mundane details, accompanied the Belgian detective through the green baize door that separated the family quarters from the servants' domain. The butler's pantry embodied the same obsessive order that characterized its master's study. Silver gleamed with mirror-like perfection on felt-lined shelves, while crystal glasses stood in precise military formations awaiting their next service. The room smelled of beeswax and metal polish, creating an atmosphere of institutional cleanliness that spoke to decades of disciplined routine. Pemberton guided them to the preparation area where the fatal brandy service had been assembled the previous evening. The silver tray remained on its designated shelf, polished to perfection, yet bearing the ghostly circular marks where decanter and glass had recently rested. Poirot examined these traces with the intensity of an archaeologist studying ancient artifacts, noting the precise positioning that reflected Sir Reginald's exacting standards. "The brandy was warmed as always?" Poirot inquired, observing the small spirit lamp positioned nearby. "Yes, sir," Pemberton replied, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years' faithful service. "Sir Reginald was most particular about temperature. I heated the Courvoisier for precisely 3 minutes, no more, no less." Mrs. Davies emerged from the scullery, her flour-dusted apron and wary expression suggesting a woman unaccustomed to such scrutiny of her domain. When questioned about the evening's routine, she revealed a crucial detail that had previously escaped attention. Lady Margaret rang for tonic water just as Pemberton was preparing the brandy service, she admitted reluctantly. He stepped into the cold larder to fetch it, leaving the tray unattended for perhaps 2 minutes. I was occupied with the evening's baking and paid little mind to comings and goings. Poirot's interest sharpened perceptibly. "And during these 2 minutes, madame, did anyone else enter this pantry?" Mrs. Davies hesitated, her gaze flickering between the detective and her butler colleague. Miss Diana came through, quite distressed she was, took a glass of water from the pitcher and continued toward the music room. Whether she noticed the brandy service, I cannot say. As Inspector Japp began a systematic search of the pantry cupboards, Poirot moved to the small sink beneath the window, his sensitive nostrils detecting something that made him pause. Leaning closer, he caught the faintest trace of bitter almonds, a scent so subtle it might have been imagination, yet unmistakably present. "Inspector," he called softly, "I believe you should examine this area most carefully." Japp's search soon yielded a small brown bottle tucked behind cleaning supplies in a lower cupboard. The label, though worn, clearly identified its contents as prussic acid, rat poison commonly used in greenhouse fumigation. The cork bore traces of recent handling, and the bottle's contents had been partially depleted. "Well, that settles the matter of means," Japp declared with satisfaction. "Cyanide, readily available and recently used. "Pemberton, this is your pantry, your responsibility." The butler's weathered features drained of colour, his hands trembling as he protested his innocence. "Inspector, I swear upon my honour, I have never seen that bottle in my pantry. Sir Reginald kept various chemicals for his greenhouse work, but they were stored in the garden shed, never in my domain." Poirot observed this exchange with characteristic thoughtfulness, his keen eyes noting not only Pemberton's genuine distress, but also the almost theatrical convenience of the evidence's discovery. Moving to the draining board, he examined the collection of polished glasses, noting one position where a faint crescent of moisture suggested recent, hasty rinsing. "The glass used for Sir Reginald's brandy," Poirot mused aloud. "You dried it thoroughly as always." "Naturally, sir. Sir Reginald would not tolerate water spots or streaks." Yet the evidence of hasty cleaning suggested otherwise, creating a contradiction that intrigued the detective's methodical mind. As Japp prepared to arrest Pemberton based on the discovered evidence, Poirot raised a gentle hand. "One moment, Inspector. Consider the psychology of our supposed criminal. Pemberton has served this household for 15 years, building his entire identity around precision and loyal service. Such a man, contemplating murder, would surely dispose of incriminating evidence more thoroughly than hiding it in his own pantry, where discovery was inevitable." "Desperate men make mistakes," Japp countered, though his certainty had begun to waver. "Perhaps," Poirot agreed diplomatically. "Yet I observe something more troubling. The evidence presents itself too conveniently, too obviously. The bottle positioned where it must be found, the lingering scent that announces itself to investigation, the timing that implicates the most obvious suspect. In my experience, true guilt rarely advertises itself so boldly." As they prepared to leave the pantry, Poirot reflected on the emerging pattern of misdirection that characterized this case. Someone had indeed committed murder, most clever, but their very cleverness was beginning to reveal itself through the calculated placement of evidence designed to mislead. The room without footprints was merely the first impossibility. The second was the notion that such a methodical crime could be solved through such obvious clues. The real murderer, Poirot suspected, was watching their investigation with considerable satisfaction, confident that conventional police methods would lead inevitably to the wrong conclusion. Despite Inspector Japp's growing conviction that Pemberton was their culprit, Poirot remained troubled by the convenient nature of the evidence. The Belgian detective's methodical mind rejected solutions that presented themselves too readily, particularly when they failed to account for the sophisticated psychology required to execute such an elaborate deception. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision, "I propose we conduct a small experiment. Let us reconstruct the events of last evening, particularly the preparation and delivery of the fatal brandy service. Sometimes the truth reveals itself not in what people say, but in what they do when they believe themselves unobserved." Within the hour, Poirot had arranged for the household to resume their positions as they had been at 9:30 the previous evening. The reconstruction would serve a dual purpose, testing the practical aspects of the murder method while observing the psychological reactions of each suspect when confronted with a recreation of the crime. In the butler's pantry, Pemberton prepared the brandy service with ritualistic precision, his movements betraying none of the nervousness one might expect from a guilty man. Poirot positioned himself strategically to observe not only the butler's actions, but also the behavior of the household members who had been granted permission to witness the reconstruction. As Pemberton warmed the courvoisier over the spirit lamp, Poirot requested a glass of water, deliberately creating the same interruption that had occurred the previous evening when Lady Margaret had requested tonic water. For precisely 1 minute and 40 seconds. The silver tray stood unattended, its contents vulnerable to tampering. During this crucial interval, Poirot observed each suspect with microscopic attention. Diana approached the pantry threshold under the pretense of offering assistance, her gaze falling upon the brandy service with an intensity that seemed to measure distances and possibilities. Lady Margaret appeared in the doorway to inquire about the tonic water, her intelligent eyes assessing the arrangement with the calculating precision of someone familiar with such details. Dr. Whitmore remained in the corridor, yet his medical training was evident in the way he catalogued every element of the scene before him. When Pemberton resumed his duties, Poirot made a crucial observation. "The glass, mon brave Pemberton. How precisely do you present it to Sir Reginald?" The butler demonstrated without hesitation, rotating the crystal balloon glass so that the Ashford family monogram faced outward. Sir Reginald was particular about avoiding the seam where the glass was joined. He preferred the rim to rest smoothly against his lips, so I always positioned the monogram correctly. "Exactement," Poirot murmured, his green eyes brightening with understanding. The habits of a fastidious man become sacred rituals for those who serve him faithfully. As they proceeded to the study door, Poirot's mind assembled the pieces of this psychological puzzle. The poison need not have been introduced into the entire brandy supply. A minute quantity applied to the specific sector of the glass rim where Sir Reginald habitually drank would prove equally fatal. The murderer had demonstrated intimate knowledge of the victim's precise habits, understanding not only his preference for warmed brandy, but also the exact positioning required for the glass service. "Inspector," Poirot explained as they stood before the locked study, "consider the elegance of this method. The poison was applied to the glass rim at the precise point where Sir Reginald's lips would touch. The bitter almond scent of cyanide would be masked by the rich aroma of warmed Courvoisier, and the quantity required would be minimal, invisible to casual observation." Japp frowned, beginning to grasp the implications. But that would require someone with detailed knowledge of Sir Reginald's drinking habits. "Precisely, mon ami. Someone who had observed these rituals countless times, who understood the household routines with intimate precision." As the reconstruction concluded, Poirot suggested a final examination of the study. However, upon returning to Sir Reginald's desk, he made a disturbing discovery. The unfinished letter to Lady Margaret, which had been positioned beneath the blotter at a precise angle during his earlier investigation, had vanished completely. "You are certain it was there?" Japp asked, searching through the papers with increasing urgency. "I am always particular about such details, Inspector. The letter was there, and now it is not." Poirot's expression grew thoughtful as he contemplated this development. "Our murderer remains active, concerned about evidence that might reveal their motive or method. The theft of this letter tells us two crucial things. First, that the killer has continued access to this room despite our investigation, and second, that the letter contained information sufficiently damaging to warrant such a risk." The missing correspondence represented more than mere evidence. It demonstrated that their adversary was monitoring the investigation's progress and taking calculated steps to protect themselves. The murderers' confidence in their elaborate deception was beginning to show cracks, revealing a growing desperation that would ultimately prove their undoing. As they prepared to leave the study, Poirot reflected on the emerging pattern of this most ingenious crime. The killer had created not one impossibility but several. The locked room without footprints, the convenient evidence implicating an innocent man, and now the vanishing letter that might have revealed their true motive. Yet in their very cleverness, they had begun to reveal the psychological profile that would eventually expose them to the penetrating analysis of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. The theft of Sir Reginald's unfinished letter represented more than mere evidence destruction. It revealed a murderer growing desperate under the pressure of Poirot's methodical investigation. The Belgian detective's keen mind recognized that such boldness indicated either supreme confidence or mounting panic, both equally instructive to one skilled in reading criminal psychology. Returning to the desk where the letter had vanished, Poirot lifted the leather blotter with characteristic precision, tilting it toward the window light. His sensitive fingers detected the faintest impressions pressed through from the missing page above. "Inspector, if you would be so kind as to provide a pencil." Japp handed over his stub of graphite with bemused compliance, watching as Poirot shaded the surface with delicate strokes. Gradually, like a photograph emerging in a chemical bath, ghostly words materialized across the paper. "My dear Margaret, recent events have compelled me to reconsider certain arrangements. Mr. Carfax will attend tomorrow. New codicil, reduction of allowance, Diana's settlement, trustees for the clinic funds, no support for Whitmore's scheme." "Voilà," Poirot murmured with satisfaction. "The motive crystallizes before our eyes. Sir Reginald intended comprehensive changes to his testamentary arrangements, changes that would have devastated several members of this household." Inspector Japp immediately telephoned Mr. Carfax, Sir Reginald's London solicitor, confirming that the deceased had indeed requested an urgent morning appointment to execute a new codicil. The solicitor had been travelling to Ashford Grange when news of the murder reached him, forcing his immediate return to London. When Poirot announced these discoveries to the assembled household, the psychological impact was immediate and revealing. Lady Margaret's composed facade cracked momentarily, her hand rising involuntarily to her throat before she regained control. The gesture spoke volumes about a woman who had married for security, only to face the prospect of complete disinheritance. Diana's reaction proved equally instructive. Her chin lifted with defiant resentment, yet beneath the anger lay unmistakable relief that her father's punitive intentions had been thwarted by death. Dr. Whitmore's medical training served him well in maintaining composure, though the slight tightening around his eyes betrayed his recognition that his clinic dreams had died with his patron's refusal. Most interesting was Pemberton's response. The faithful butler's gaze flickered between his mistress and the young lady, professional discretion warring with growing unease about loyalties and secrets he had long protected. As afternoon mist crept across the estate grounds, Poirot found himself drawn to the greenhouse complex where Sir Reginald had cultivated exotic plants with the same tyrannical precision he applied to human relationships. The garden shed stood locked, its chemical supplies secured against unauthorized access. Yet something about the arrangement troubled the detective's methodical mind. His contemplation was shattered by a cry from the direction of the greenhouses. "Help! Someone's collapsed!" Racing toward the sound, Poirot and Inspector Japp discovered Pemberton unconscious among the terracotta pots, the unmistakable scent of bitter almonds hanging in the enclosed air. Dr. Whitmore arrived moments later, immediately recognizing the symptoms of cyanide exposure and dragging the butler into fresh air with practiced efficiency. As Pemberton gradually regained consciousness, he gasped out his story. A note had appeared on his tea tray, apparently from Sir Reginald, requesting a discreet meeting at the greenhouse regarding instructions for the police visit. The handwriting had seemed authentic, the request plausible enough to overcome his natural caution. Examining the forged note, Poirot observed crucial details that revealed the deception. The capital letters bite downward into the paper, a habit of impatience. Sir Reginald's authentic correspondence shows pressure on the upstrokes, and observe the phrase, "regarding the police visit," our victim habitually wrote, "in respect of." The forger is clever, but cannot entirely escape their own writing patterns. The second crime attempt confirmed Poirot's growing understanding of their adversary. This was not merely about financial gain, but about intellectual superiority, a mind that derived satisfaction from elaborate deceptions and psychological manipulation. The murderer had grown concerned that Pemberton possessed some crucial knowledge about household routines that might expose their method. "Inspector," Poirot said as they ensured Pemberton's safety, "we are dealing with someone who believes themselves cleverer than conventional investigation. The locked room without footprints was never about impossibility. It was about demonstrating perfect mastery over circumstances and people alike. Our murderer takes pride in their elaborate scheme, and that pride will ultimately prove their undoing. As evening shadows lengthened across Ashford Grange, Poirot sensed the investigation approaching its crucial phase. The theft of the letter, the attempt on Pemberton's life, and the psychological pressure building within the household all pointed toward a final confrontation where truth would emerge through the careful application of his little gray cells to a mind that had revealed its fundamental weakness through the very perfection of its crime. The evening shadows lengthened across Ashford Grange as Poirot contemplated the murderer's growing desperation. Pemberton's narrow escape had confirmed what the Belgian detective had long suspected. Their adversary was monitoring the investigation closely and would not hesitate to eliminate potential threats. Yet this very boldness would prove their undoing, for in acting so decisively, they had revealed crucial aspects of their psychology that no amount of careful planning could conceal. Gathering the household in the drawing room under the pretense of steadying nerves with refreshment, Poirot orchestrated what appeared to be a simple social gesture, but was, in reality, a sophisticated psychological examination. He requested that identical balloon glasses be prepared, the same crystal stemware that Sir Reginald had preferred, each positioned with the Ashford monogram facing outward exactly as Pemberton had described. As conversation flowed around topics of weather and music, Poirot made his crucial request. "Perhaps each will be so kind as to hand me a glass." The responses proved illuminating beyond his expectations. Lady Margaret lifted her glass with aristocratic precision, maintaining its exact orientation without the slightest adjustment, the behavior of someone accustomed to receiving service rather than providing it. Dr. Whitmore selected a glass with professional absent-mindedness, began to hand it over, then paused with a tiny, instinctive rotation that positioned the monogram outward, a movement so natural it spoke of intimate familiarity with such requirements. Most revealing was Diana's response. She grasped her glass and with swift, practiced efficiency ensured the monogram faced away from herself toward the recipient. Precisely the habit of someone who had served her, demanding father countless times, understanding his preferences through years of careful observation. Building upon these observations, Poirot requested each suspect to provide a written account of their movements on the fatal evening, using Sir Reginald's own fountain pen and stationery. The exercise served multiple purposes, comparing handwriting to the forged greenhouse note while observing how each person unconsciously revealed their true nature through script and phrasing. Lady Margaret's elegant, rounded script employed old-fashioned phrases like "in respect of" and "thereafter," the language of her generation and social class. Diana's writing slanted decisively with downward pressure on capitals, her modern phrasing favoring "regarding" and "presently." Dr. Whitmore began with neat medical printing before transitioning to cursive that grew more fluid as he continued, his professional training evident in both the precision of his letters and his choice of formal phrases like "pursuant to" and "in view of." When Poirot lightly shaded the leather blotter beneath, ghostly impressions emerged, the accumulated pressure patterns of different hands, different habits, different personalities. The comparison to the forged greenhouse note became unmistakable. The downward bite of impatient capitals, the modern phrasing, the subtle traces that no amount of conscious deception could entirely mask. As the evening progressed, Poirot found himself drawn once more to the butler's pantry, not to search for additional evidence, but to reconstruct the crucial moments when death had been prepared with such methodical precision. Standing where Pemberton had stood during those vital 2 minutes, the Belgian detective experienced the breakthrough that his little gray cells had been approaching since the investigation began. The locked study had never been the scene of the crime. It was merely the stage where the final act had played out. The murder had occurred here, in this mundane pantry, during those brief moments when the brandy service sat unattended. The killer had not needed to enter Sir Reginald's study. had not needed to contend with locked doors or polished floors that would betray their presence. The solution was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its precision. Sir Reginald's fastidious habits, so carefully catered to by his devoted butler, had become the instrument of his destruction. The monogram always positioned identically, the glass always presented at the same angle, the exact spot where his lips would touch the rim utterly predictable through years of ritualistic service. A minute quantity of cyanide, applied to that precise location during the crucial window of opportunity, would prove as fatal as any dramatic confrontation. The bitter almond scent would be masked by the rich aroma of warmed Courvoisier, and the victim would walk calmly to his death, never suspecting that his evening brandy had been transformed into an instrument of murder. As Poirot returned to observe the assembled suspects, his penetrating gaze now carried the weight of complete understanding. The psychological testing had revealed not merely opportunity, but intimate knowledge of the victim's habits. The handwriting analysis had exposed the forger's identity through unconscious patterns that conscious deception could not entirely suppress. Most crucially, the realization about the glass positioning had revealed the elegant simplicity that lay beneath the apparent impossibility. Yet the Belgian detective maintained his characteristic discretion, allowing no hint of his breakthrough to color his interactions with the household. The time for revelation would come, but not yet. The murderers' confidence in their elaborate deception needed to ripen into overconfidence. Their pride in their intellectual superiority needed to blind them to the methodical net that was closing around them. Inspector Japp, observing Poirot's subtle change in demeanor, recognized the signs of a case approaching its resolution. "You've solved it, haven't you?" he whispered during a quiet moment in the corridor. "The little grey cells have indeed arranged the facts in their proper order," Poirot replied with quiet satisfaction. "Tomorrow, Inspector, we shall gather everyone together for the final act of this most instructive drama. For while our murderer has demonstrated considerable cleverness in the execution of their crime, they have underestimated the power of human psychology to reveal truth through the smallest details of character and habit." As the household retired for what would prove to be their final night of uncertainty, Poirot reflected on the elegant cruelty of a crime that had turned a victim's own fastidious nature against him. The room without footprints had been a masterpiece of misdirection, but the human heart, with all its unconscious betrayals and ingrained habits, had proven far more revealing than any locked door or polished floor. The morning that would bring resolution to the mystery of Ashford Grange dawned with crystalline clarity, as if nature itself conspired to provide the perfect backdrop for truth to emerge from shadows of deception. Poirot had risen early, spending the quiet hours in contemplative preparation, arranging his thoughts with the same meticulous precision he applied to his appearance. Every element of his final presentation must contribute to the inexorable logic that would expose the murderer's elaborate charade. Before assembling the household, Poirot conducted several crucial verifications that would complete his understanding of the crime. A telephone call to Mr. Carfax in London confirmed what the shaded impressions on the blotter had already revealed. Sir Reginald's intended codicil would have been devastating in its thoroughness. Not merely reducing Lady Margaret's allowance and Diana's settlement, but establishing restrictive trusteeship over both women's financial futures. Most tellingly, the solicitor revealed Sir Reginald's exact words from their previous conversation. "I intend to teach certain members of my household the salutary lesson that I am not to be coerced by tears or threats." A visit to the village chemist, Mr. Ellaby, provided additional confirmation of Poirot's theories. The poison book showed no recent sales of prussic acid. The last entry dated 8 months prior, a greenhouse fumigant ordered by Sir Reginald himself and delivered with proper signatures to the estate gardener. When questioned, the gardener revealed a crucial detail. "Miss Diana sometimes assisted with the orchids of an afternoon, sir. Knew her way about the watering schedule better than most, and Sir Reginald trusted her with the key to the chemical stores when I was occupied elsewhere." Returning to Ashford Grange, Poirot orchestrated what appeared to be a simple social gesture, but was, in reality, a sophisticated psychological examination. He requested that identical balloon glasses be prepared, the same crystal stemware Sir Reginald had preferred, and asked each household member to demonstrate how they would serve brandy to a guest. The responses proved illuminating beyond his expectations. Lady Margaret handled her glass with aristocratic precision, maintaining its orientation without adjustment, the behavior of someone accustomed to receiving service rather than providing it. Dr. Whitmore selected his glass with professional absent-mindedness, then made an instinctive, tiny rotation that positioned the monogram outward, a movement so natural it spoke of intimate familiarity with such requirements. Most revealing was Diana's response. She grasped her glass with swift, practiced efficiency, ensuring the monogram faced away from herself toward the recipient. Precisely the habit of someone who had served her demanding father countless times, understanding his preferences through years of careful observation. The movement was so automatic, so deeply ingrained, that conscious thought could not have suppressed it. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the estate grounds, Poirot prepared for the final act of this psychological drama. He had arranged for sealed envelopes to be delivered to each suspect, containing a carefully crafted message designed to prey upon guilty nerves. The impressions on the study blotter have yielded a complete reconstruction of the missing letter. Mr. Carfax will attend this evening to advise on legal implications. The contents were deliberately ambiguous, bait not for the rational mind, which would dismiss it as inconclusive, but for the conscience, which cannot help but react to shadow and suggestion. At precisely 4 o'clock, the drawing-room of Ashford Grange received its reluctant congregation. Lady Margaret entered with her characteristic composed dignity, though careful observation revealed the slight tremor in her gloved hands as she selected her customary position. Diana followed with visible agitation, her earlier defiance now tempered by growing apprehension about what revelations might emerge. Dr. Whitmore maintained his professional composure, yet his medical training could not entirely conceal the tension that tightened the muscles around his eyes. Pemberton, still pale from his greenhouse ordeal, stood respectfully near the door with the quiet dignity of a man whose loyalty had been tested by fire. Poirot positioned himself strategically near the fireplace, his small figure commanding attention through sheer force of intellectual authority rather than physical presence. Inspector Japp occupied a chair near the door, his notebook ready to record the confession that would inevitably follow the Belgian detective's methodical dismantling of the crime. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his accented English lending formal gravity to the proceedings, "we have gathered to resolve a mystery that has challenged conventional understanding. The locked room without footprints seemed to suggest an impossibility. Yet, as I have often observed, the most impossible crimes frequently prove to have the most elegant solutions, once one applies the proper understanding of human psychology." His penetrating gaze moved from face to face, cataloguing the subtle reactions that would confirm his deductions. The psychological testing had revealed unconscious knowledge, the handwriting analysis had exposed the forger's identity, and the missing letter had provided the final piece of motive. Now, with all elements aligned, Hercule Poirot prepared to demonstrate how human nature, with all its unconscious betrayals and ingrained habits, had proven far more revealing than any locked door or polished floor. The moment of revelation had arrived, and with it, the inexorable justice that would restore order to a household poisoned by greed, resentment, and the fatal underestimation of the little grey cells that had methodically unravelled their perfect crime. "The crime before us," Poirot began, his voice carrying the measured authority of complete certainty, appeared to present 3 impossibilities that challenged conventional understanding. A room sealed to deny entry or exit, a method that acted after the murderer had withdrawn, and evidence so conveniently placed that it would mislead any investigation toward the wrong conclusion. He moved with characteristic precision toward the center of the drawing room, his penetrating gaze cataloguing the subtle reactions of each assembled suspect. The moment of truth had arrived, and with it, the inexorable justice that would restore order to this poisoned household. Sir Reginald's study, with its polished floor showing only his own footprints, was never the scene of the crime. It was merely the final tableau where death played out its predetermined course. The murder occurred elsewhere, in the butler's pantry, during those crucial 2 minutes when the brandy service sat unattended while Pemberton fetched tonic water. Inspector Japp leaned forward with keen interest, recognizing the methodical approach that had solved so many seemingly impossible cases. Lady Margaret's composed facade began showing hairline cracks, while Dr. Whitmore maintained professional attention despite the growing tension around his eyes. The solution required intimate knowledge of Sir Reginald's fastidious habits. Poirot continued relentlessly. The brandy glass, always positioned identically, the monogram facing outward, presented at the precise angle that avoided the crystal seam. Years of ritual had made the fatal moment utterly predictable. The detective's delicate hand described a small arc in the air. The cyanide was not poured into the decanter, too risky, too easily detected. Instead, a minute quantity was painted upon the exact segment of the glass rim where Sir Reginald's lips would inevitably touch. The warmed Courvoisier, rich with aroma, masked the faint bitter almond scent completely. Diana's composure began to crack, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the chair arms with increasing desperation. Yet still she remained silent, perhaps hoping that Poirot's methodical analysis might somehow falter before reaching its inevitable conclusion. But who possessed such intimate knowledge? Poirot asked, his gaze sweeping the assembled suspects. Lady Margaret handled her glass with aristocratic precision, making no automatic adjustments, the behavior of one accustomed to receiving service rather than providing it. Dr. Whitmore's movements, while courteous, lacked the unconscious certainty of ingrained habit. The silence stretched taut as violin strings as Poirot's penetrating stare fixed upon Diana Ashford. Only you, mademoiselle, demonstrated the unconscious, automatic rotation that positioned the monogram correctly, not servant's mimicry, but the ingrained reflex of a daughter who had adapted to a tyrant's preferences for years. The handwriting analysis of the forged greenhouse note confirmed what psychology had already revealed. He continued with inexorable logic. The downward pressure on capital letters, the modern phrasing favoring regarding over in respect of, patterns that matched your writing sample perfectly, despite conscious attempts at deception. Dr. Whitmore turned toward his fiancée with stricken comprehension. "Diana, tell him this is impossible." She did not meet his gaze, her silence becoming more damning than any confession. The weight of accumulated evidence pressed down upon the drawing room like gathering storm clouds. "The missing letter revealed your motive most clearly," Poirot observed with quiet satisfaction. "Sir Reginald intended not merely to reduce your inheritance, but to place it under restrictive trusteeship that would have made you financially dependent for life. His rejection of Dr. Whitmore's clinic was the final humiliation, calling your fiancé a fortune hunter and you a parasite." In the pantry, Poirot had discovered the telltale traces that corroborated his deductions. An asymmetrical moisture mark on the glass rim where poison had been applied, a faint ring on the draining board where a dampened implement had rested, and the whisper of bitter almonds still haunting the sink trap where hasty cleaning had occurred. "The attempt on Pemberton's life confirmed your desperation," the detective continued. "He possessed dangerous knowledge, not merely of household routines, but of your increasing involvement in serving your father when you found the butler too slow. He would have recalled that you, not the servants, often positioned the monogram correctly." Diana's defiance finally crumbled completely, her voice emerging as barely a whisper. "He would have destroyed us both. James's dreams, my future, everything would have been crushed under his need for control. You arranged for his habits to complete what your hand began, Poirot said with profound sadness. He walked to his death as he had walked through all your lives, alone, unquestioned, in a straight line. As Inspector Japp moved forward to make the arrest, Diana's composure shattered into fragments. "I would have done what was necessary," she said, her voice carrying the terrible weight of absolute conviction. Poirot turned away, relief and sorrow mingling in his expression. The little grey cells had triumphed once again, yet he took no joy in exposing how the cleverest plan remained powerless against the quiet testimony of human habit and the inexorable demands of justice. The weight of Poirot's methodical revelation settled upon the drawing-room like a physical presence, crushing Diana's remaining defiance beneath the inexorable logic of accumulated evidence. Her composure, so carefully maintained throughout the investigation, finally shattered completely. She sank into her chair, her face buried in trembling hands, transformed from calculating murderer to broken young woman in the space of a heartbeat. Inspector Japp moved forward with professional dignity, his voice carrying the formal weight of justice. "Diana Ashford, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashford and the attempted murder of William Pemberton." Dr. Whitmore rushed to her side, his medical training proving inadequate preparation for the emotional devastation of discovering that the woman he loved had committed such calculated violence. The engagement ring that had symbolized their shared future now represented only bitter irony. How thoroughly he had misjudged the character of his intended bride. "The method, you see," Poirot explained with characteristic precision, "was elegant in its simplicity once one understood the psychology involved. The locked study was merely a stage setting, designed to focus attention on impossibilities while the true crime occurred in the butler's pantry, during those crucial 2 minutes when the brandy service sat unattended." His delicate hand described a small arc, illustrating the fatal process. Using a small implement, perhaps a manicure stick or similar tool, Miss Diana applied a minute quantity of cyanide to the precise segment of the glass rim where her father's lips would inevitably touch. Years of observing his fastidious habits had made this fatal moment utterly predictable. Lady Margaret approached with measured steps, her aristocratic composure intact yet somehow diminished. "I cannot entirely condemn her motives, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald's letter spoke of reducing my allowance to a pittance while placing Diana's inheritance under trustees who would control every aspect of her existence. The tragedy, madame, lies not in the presence of motive, but in the choice of method," Poirot replied with gentle firmness. "Miss Diana possessed intelligence, youth, and the devotion of an honorable man, resources that might have provided escape through legitimate means. Instead, she chose calculated violence, transforming herself into the very tyranny she claimed to despise." Pemberton, still pale from his greenhouse ordeal, found quiet vindication in the moment. His loyalty, though questioned, had remained unwavering, and now truth had freed him from suspicion's shadow. As Diana was led away, her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "He would have destroyed us both. James's dreams, my future, everything crushed under his need for control. I thought you would arrest Pemberton. He would have borne it patiently, the martyr to his master's memory." "The tidy crimes are the most untidy in their endings," Poirot observed sadly. "You borrowed his weapon, control, yet failed to control the unconscious betrayals of your own nature. The automatic positioning of the brandy glass, the downward pressure of your handwriting, the intimate knowledge of household routines. These revealed years of careful observation, motivated not by affection, but by calculating resentment." Dr. Whitmore's anguish was palpable. "I never suspected. She seemed so devoted, despite their conflicts." "The performance was indeed masterful," Poirot acknowledged. "Yet even the most accomplished deception cannot entirely suppress the unconscious revelations of true character. Human psychology leaves footprints that no amount of polished wax can conceal." As the constabulary completed their procedures and the household began adapting to their dramatically altered circumstances, Poirot prepared for departure. The grey November morning that had brought him to Ashford Grange seemed distant, though barely 48 hours had elapsed since the impossible murder was first announced. "Will justice truly be served?" Dr. Whitmore asked, his professional courtesy intact despite personal devastation. "Justice, Doctor, is not merely punishment, but understanding," Poirot replied, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision. Miss Diana convinced herself that murder was justified by circumstances, yet her true motive was the simple inability to accept that others might control her destiny. The human capacity for self-deception often exceeds even the most elaborate criminal schemes. As the motor car carried him toward the railway station, Poirot reflected on the elegant cruelty of a crime that had turned a victim's own fastidious nature against him. The room without footprints would be remembered as a masterpiece of misdirection, yet the solution had emerged through methodical application of psychology to the unconscious betrayals that no conscious planning could suppress. The morning train to London departed precisely on schedule, carrying Hercule Poirot back toward civilization's comforts and the inevitable next telegram summoning his unique talents. Behind him, Ashford Grange settled into its new reality, forever changed by the revelation that the most dangerous mysteries hide not in locked rooms or missing footprints, but in the human heart's capacity for both love and calculated destruction. "The little grey cells," he murmured to himself with quiet satisfaction. "They never fail to illuminate the darkness of human deception."